Welcome to the Guna Fanzine Arsenal Women podcast. I'm back alongside Daisy this week. The last time us two spoke was after we lost 5-2 to Bayern Munich in the Champions League. So a lot has happened since then. We have won in both Europe and in the WSL, winning 2-0 at West Ham. And really, it's been a good week for interim manager Renee Slegers. She's done her job and she's got Arsenal through to the international break with 2 wins. Whether she's done enough to become the permanent manager, we're not so sure, however, as Arsenal continue the search for Jonas Eidevall's replacement. Daisy, you're going to be at Lee Sports Village. Do you reckon it'll be Renee? Do you reckon there'll be someone new? And are you excited for... It's going to be a change one way or another after the international break, which has come at quite a convenient time.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult with these situations because they don't give away a whole lot of information. Obviously, the best outcome that could have happened for Renee in terms of the victories, maybe a little bit less on the performance in terms of West Ham did get the result, which is obviously huge, and West Ham have been sort of one that's kind of, tripped us up a couple of times in recent seasons. But yeah, in terms of Manchester United, obviously it's always an interesting one. Last year away, we probably should have done better. I thought it was quite a poor performance and obviously a few mistakes that cost us. My concern is potentially that those mistakes could happen again. We've seen that, haven't we, in recent games. There's still a sort of a slight nerve. I thought it was better in the West Ham game, but I still think there's a slight nerve in defence. We saw Cadena giving away that goal against Valerenga quite easily. So I'm a little bit concerned that Man United may punish us. But I also think watching sort of their recent performances, they've started the season well, but there's still mistakes in them and moments that we can capitalise on. And I expect Arsenal to come out firing like they always do against attacking sides. Whether that will be Renee is an interesting one. I think the international breaks come at a fantastic time for Arsenal, and potentially it gives them an opportunity to really make that decision and make the right one and bring the right person in.
Well, out of the names out there, if it was Casey Stoney going back to Manchester United, where, she obviously lifted them up to the WSL in charge, and then before then moving on to America. I mean, if it's her going back to United for her first game at Arsenal, it'd be some story. But obviously, we're none the wiser as to that. What I do know is, Renee Slegers is on the shortlist. Arsenal have thought about her, basically since she took the job. And, that's natural of any interim manager, I think. There's always a chance that if they do well, then they are going to be in the running to take permanent charge. I think you're completely right in that she's gone in and done the job of winning both games. Valerenga, probably the scoreline flatters us a tiny bit. We did attack well in the second half. And then West Ham, I thought we were a little bit slow again, probably for 65, 70 minutes. The penalty opens the game up, and then the quadruple subs did the business, essentially. Great to see Rosa Kafaji scoring. Let's start with West Ham then, because for quite a while in that game, it was a little slow, a little sluggish. For me, the problems were in the midfield. I thought Kim Little and Leah Valti were far too slow on the ball, far too negative at times. And that's going to be a real area that whoever comes in needs to address, because I do feel for Kyra Cooney-Cross sat on the bench at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite, when you watch the game back and especially you watch that first half, it's clear that this team has played a lot of minutes, and it's very, hard to be saying this at this point in the season, but I guess that is the truth. And it's about that rotation. We've talked about this. It's about getting that right. Perhaps maybe that's where she got it wrong. I do think Kim Little is a fantastic player, and we always talk about her, really running the midfield. And the same with Volti, actually. I've written pieces about this, but in terms of 2 players that in the squad that the fitness needs to be managed, it's definitely those 2. And perhaps a poor decision not to start, Kyra Cooney-Cross, who I think is a lot fitter, has the ability to play in that midfield and brings a lot of qualities as well. We've seen her really this season, I think, work on, winning the ball back, and it's a big sort of aspect of Leah Volti's play that we've wanted and needed in this side, and definitely maybe could have turned to some other players, especially Kyra, in that game. And I was surprised that those changes weren't made. Also surprised not to see the players like Kafaji being used from the start. I do think obviously that's something that she's going to have to look at now, but it does seem like she's not sort of impacted by those sort of spur of the moment goals or things like that in terms of her selection. But I do think if it's one thing that she can take, and hopefully it happens over this international break, is to just rest Kim Little, who I think has played an insane amount of minutes. And I think you'd almost tell in herself that she seemed like she wasn't right against West Ham. She seemed tired. She seemed like she was struggling, and almost, you don't want to say that a player will ever play purposely bad, but she did sort of have moments, didn't she, where you may be thinking, is she maybe signaling that she, she'll always do everything for Arsenal, we know that, but maybe we should be sensible and bring somebody else in and give her the rest and protect her really because we need her.
I think having both her and Valti, I feel like we've said this so many times, we know both of their individual qualities, but do you need the security of both of them? And maybe in some of the bigger games you do, but when you're trying to break down the low block of West Ham, which we obviously failed to do last year, it didn't feel like lessons were learnt there. But what I would say on team selection is if Renee comes in, for Valerenga and West Ham and makes wholesale changes, really tries to make a mark on the team, drops players, brings new ones in, I think that's what does that say then about her relationship with Jonas Eidevall? It almost borders on disrespect if she then tears up the whole team and his tactics. So, and obviously she does have that respect for him. Has worked under him at two clubs now for a year at Arsenal. For time at Rosengard as well. So she was never going to be a completely different figure to Jonas Eidevall, and I think that's maybe the frustrating things in a way is how much have we learned about these players. They've regrouped well. They've all spoken about how it's been an emotional week about their respect for Jonas. But it felt like if Jonas was still in charge for these two games, we probably wouldn't have noticed, would we? It felt just like two Jonas Eidevall performances, perhaps with a little bit of pressure off, a little bit maybe, I'd say, particularly in the Valerenga game. And obviously West Ham, we got the job done, and it was a happy end to the week, certainly. But for Renee Slegers, it felt more like relief rather than triumph come West Ham.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's working under pressure. She's working on just under time constraints. We know that, but we do sort of have to look maybe at the tactics and say, was there that much difference between the way that we played in those two games and the way we played under Jonas? I think that the real difference, like you say, was just the players on the pitch, the intensity, the decision making, the speed of in which we played. If we take that Valerenga game, for example, first minute in, we get a goal from Emily Fox, who's in the right position, maybe potentially a bit of poor defending, but you've got to look at the overall picture. If Arsenal want to move forward and they want to address sort of the problems, and we've talked about this so much, whether that's defensively, whether that's scoring goals, whether that's taking chances. If we look at the Chelsea game, for example, we created significantly more, I thought, than Chelsea. We had a lot of opportunities and we didn't take them. Chelsea, on the other hand, had a few opportunities and took them, and we're kind of seeing that really under such a strong manager in Sonia Bonpastor. So I think it's interesting if Arsenal can get somebody in who's really going to address those weaknesses, maybe doesn't have that history with Jonas, doesn't have a history with the players, but wants to get the most out of the players that we've got. I think a real big concern is that I think a lot of people were worried about under Jonas was the players regressing rather than improving. And we saw that with people have been pointing out, Russo, for example, maybe not scoring as many as we would have liked. Our strikers in general not being able to score. Defensively, we've still got a few question marks. So I do think it's interesting if Arsenal potentially look to Casey Stoney, like we've pointed this out, but how is she going to get the most out of individual players? The way that she played at Manchester United, and then when she went over to America, was about being defensive. It was about getting those results. And she was actually, I think, I remember I read recently that she was criticised when she like had the job in America for the lack of goals scored. So it's things like this that I think Arsenal have got to consider. And I'm interested to see what kind of coach they go for and what their focus is going to be on, because there is going to be pressure on that person, and they've got a lot of we've got a fantastic squad, so it's not like you're working with a small squad or, a weaker squad. You've got the talent there. It's just how can you get the most out of these players? And I think it just shows, hate to say it, but it shows what a great job sort of Sonia has done coming into that Chelsea side as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Renee, isn't it? Because obviously we can give her a lot of praise for this week, but she has been under that Jonas Eidevall coaching staff, and you talk about players regressing. Her main role was player development, so a part of that is going to fall on her shoulders as well, and could potentially be used as a criticism, because obviously now she's gone, we can obviously praise the good things maybe, and we can almost act like she's been doing wonders while Jonas was in charge, and obviously we don't know, but certainly in some aspects of player development, we're going to come on to Alessia Russo in a minute, because I think it's a bit of a worry for her. In terms of some of her recent form, but it's hard for me because I feel like we're almost coming on and criticizing Renee, and obviously she's done her job. I think it's more criticizing, if the club stick with her, stick with everything else there, after Jonas Eidevall left them behind, it's almost the club admitting actually we could have happily had Jonas continuing, but he's resigned, and then it's And then I think there's questions towards the club. We know that what Jonas's objectives were this season. Are Arsenal too far behind in the WSL already? 5 points. You could possibly say yes, 5 points behind Manchester City, four behind Chelsea, who do have a game in hand on City and Arsenal. Obviously, that United game was postponed. I think the tough thing for me is like we talked about off air, is you change, one man, but you leave the rest of the coaching staff behind. And just from the performances so far, I think Renee's professionally has done completely the right thing. She's got her head down. She's put two teams out. She's coached them to two wins. She's not gone in there to go, you know what, I want this job. Here's what Renee Slegers' ball looks like. It's going to be amazing. We're going to change it all up. She's done a very sort of loyal to Jonas, loyal to the club, week in charge. But I just think we're going to need to see more as fans, aren't we? And if there's no movement come after the international break, then we're going to presume it could be, it could be quite an extended interim passage for Renee. It's really hard to know exactly where the club are going to turn, because the owner's decision came as a shock to the club, so they have not had lots of time to plan this next move.
Yeah, and actually, considering what you're saying, I wonder if potentially that more time will be given because, like you say, she's been working under time constraints, and so is the rest of the squad. Yes, they're still trying to carry on what they were trying to build because there are key ideas there, and there are some. There's no point denying that there are some things that do work and some things that we could maybe build from. And I do think maybe in terms of the club that we know Arsenal is and the fans and sort of the Jonas outside and things like that, we've not really seen that before, and the club are obviously maybe not expecting that, like you say, and they've had to react in terms mainly, obviously performance is considered, but mainly in terms of such a loyal fan base and kind of worried about how that relationship is going to be affected by continuing with Jonas in charge. But it will be interesting to see if Renee does kind of continue with that position, especially going into that United game. And obviously big games that are coming up, and every game is a big game in the WSL, especially when you're how many points behind everybody else. But I would be interested to see if that's maybe when we start to see a little bit more from her, when she's had time to work with these players. She's had time to consider, like you say, individual players. She spoke so little in the press conference about Russo in terms of not hitting the mark. She kind of brushed over that and sort of said, she's in the right place at the right time, which I thought was interesting, and maybe we'll delve into that. But maybe more time and this international break, and she's obviously said that it's been a bit of a whirlwind for her. It does give her a little bit of a chance to actually think, if she does continue in this role, what can she show? When are we going to sort of start to see her building something bigger or something different? And maybe we'll start also, when we play different opponents, we're going to see her how she adapts, right, to different games. She's done quite well in that, I will say. Obviously, two kind of different opponents. Maybe I thought Valerenga ended up being quite defensive. But they definitely had moments where they could punish us, and so did West Ham. So it's interesting to see how she fares against her Manchester United side if she is to play that game, who are going to come out obviously attacking. And I always think those games make for such good, with Arsenal playing those higher teams and both attacking teams, it does provide entertainment, and it's interesting to see how she'll face up to that challenge if she is to stay in the position.
Yeah, and bar that draw against Brighton, United have started really well and
Yeah.
defensively have been really, really sound. So it'll definitely be interesting. Just wrapping up the West Ham game, then having a look at the stats, which I don't usually do, to be fair, but 11 shots for Arsenal, 10 for West Ham. But Arsenal had 40 touches in the penalty area compared to just 9 from West Ham. So I did think the defence was a plus. I thought Steph Catley didn't do a lot wrong. Obviously, Leah Williamson didn't actually come out to warm up in the end. She sort of stood and watched from the side. So obviously a couple of injury concerns there with Lotte Wubben-Moy out concussed. And I think they've both had slightly different training schedules. I was reading yesterday in the England camp, with obviously that game coming up on Friday. But Arsenal, as we said, a little bit sluggish until that goal, but they were good defensively. I thought Van Domselaar did well, a couple of good saves towards the end. But that key moment, Daisy, when you make a quadruple sub, it is going to be a case it'll either not work or it'll really work. And it did really work. Stina Blackstenius in those 20 minutes just offered twice what Alessia Russo did in 70, unfortunately for Russo. But, Blackstenius, I think she's got every right at the moment to be knocking on the manager's door and asking to be starting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that was quite brave from Renee, in terms of making those four substitutions. Maybe something we've sort of stood at the sidelines as fans and sort of criticised Jonas for in those final few games, was not using Kafaji to her advantage, not bringing off the right players at the right time. I thought the subs and who he brought off who she brought off, sorry, was absolutely perfect. And yeah, obviously it's a risk in a game like that, but that was the moment I think she knew that we needed to change something and it wasn't working. If we continued to do that for 90 minutes, it might have finished 0-0. And I started to think at one point it was going to. But yeah, in terms of Stina Blackstenius, obviously it's always been kind of we had this discussion so much whether we play both together, and obviously when Mariona came in we kind of got that extra offer really, because she's been playing, you know, in the 10 at times, she's been playing out wide, and that's kind of left us with, now we're back to Russo or Blackstenius because there's no sort of way that we can really make that work in any system, and if we're honest it just didn't work in terms of them two playing together. So yeah, I mean I think we all know what kind of player Stina Blackstenius is. Maybe she has moments where we're thinking you need to kind of finish that or you need to put that chance away, but at the minute we're kind of in that boat with both strikers, and I do think that's quite interesting, that Stina's sort of been playing deeper as well. In this game I thought she played on the you know, on the front foot. She was extremely sort of trying to get in those positions multiple times before she even won the penalty. So yeah, I do think it's a question now of kind of what, these are our options, this is who we've got, how are we going to, you know, use them. And I do feel for Russo in this situation, because it's kind of one of those ones where you don't know whether to play it out and see if maybe the form returns, or just, you know, eventually unfortunately we kind of have to make that change, and we can't just sort of give her that free pass every week. But it's annoying, isn't it, and frustrating when you know the player that's in there. We've just seen her obviously win that England award, and it's reflecting on that period that she had last season where she was there in the key moments.
I think this will be an interesting international break, actually, for Arsenal's England players. You know, we're obviously not sure if Wubben-Moy will play, but Williamson's probably been under the weather. Mead's not been at her best. You know, she's been in and out of the side. Roos has not been at her best. So how will that translate now? You know, as key England players, will Sarina Wiegman go to them and say, actually, you know, you've not been at it for your club, we're going to try something else in the national team? Or are they going to go and flourish in the national team, and then Arsenal fans are going to go, wait a minute, why is it not been working out? Because they are such pivotal players, you know, for the Lionesses. Do you? I feel like we'll be keeping a really close eye on them, because we're used to them turning up and being brilliant for England. But the start they've had to the season, you know, it might not quite be the case, especially against some tough opposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't want to make this an England podcast, but I do think in a way that Serena's got some extremely tough decisions, and actually she's missing quite a lot of players. Just to obviously bring up the fact that I think yesterday or the day before, it was 4 senior centre backs weren't training with the squad. You know, she's had Lauren James drop out, and that does really make for a selection headache, even specifically with those Arsenal players. Like you say, you know, Serena has put that trust in Russo, especially since we've seen obviously Rachel Daly come out of that side. But now she's facing some tough competition, because I think a lot of people are raising that question mark about players like Aggie Beaver-Jones, who could come into that, and obviously people like suggesting potentially playing both of them. And it's that same thing again of having too many players and not really knowing how to fit them in. I'm interested to see if Serena does sort of go with Beth Mead as well. In terms of the centre backs, I think it's just a case of fitness, and I don't know if she'd be willing to risk that. But it is a huge game. I know it's a friendly, but it's at Wembley. It's against a familiar enemy, so it's very sort of interesting to see where that selection does go. But Serena's also got to be looking at those players outside of Arsenal who are in that, you know, who are in their form of their life, and maybe that will mean that certain players are going to miss out, you know, players like Jess Park and things like that, who are maybe deserving to have that starting role. So it's going to be an interesting week. It's going to be an interesting week across all sort of international teams as well. I'm interested to see sort of Caitlin Ford, if she continues that form that she's in at the moment with Australia, players like that. So, and Steph Catley obviously trying to get back to that full fitness, because yeah, I agree with what you said previously. I think she had a very good game, and it'd be interesting to see the role that she can play.
Yeah, I'll have an eye on those Aussies. Thought it was a shame we didn't have Cooney Cross for Gorry versus Gorry for a bit longer. Obviously,
Yeah.
the Borders midfield duo. Gorry's just such a good player. She walked past me at one point after, and the difference in heights between the two of us, you can imagine. You just think, how on earth are you so good in such a difficult, you know, physical position? You know, 5 foot whatever she
Yeah.
is. So, yeah, great to watch her, and that's not a bad West Ham team at all as well. You know, Asei and Ueki constantly trying to turn in behind on the counter attack, and but one player I have to mention for praise, I think she's at her best week in an Arsenal shirt, is Mariona Caldentey. Took her goal so well against Valerenga. She seems to come alive in those Champions League nights, as we've talked about before, and that more central role, she just wants to get on the ball and drive forward. And at times when she's played wide, she's become a bit isolated. Sometimes it's slowed down a bit, and she's not quite built those those relationships. But I think through the middle, there's a bit more onus on her to just go do what you like, pick up the ball, get it forward. We'll get the players in and around you. And I think she's come into her own a little bit, actually trying to take that number 10 shirt. We spoke in the summer about where she might play. Arsenal don't probably know her best position at the moment, but I think, whatever happens with Mariona, wherever she plays, you are going to get her 100% work rate. I think that's what's almost impressed me the most, is just how much she wants to win the ball, use it effectively, and win every game she plays in. And a very cheeky penalty as well on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about finding a player's best position, we're not usually spoilt for choice in terms of that no matter where they play, they bring something. I thought it was interesting when Kafaji came on and Mariona went to the number 10 and Kafaji sort of played a lot out wide. I didn't actually sort of expect that. Obviously, I don't know why I've associated Kafaji with coming in and playing that number 10, but actually, potentially this is a position, if we do use Kafaji, where they could both sort of work together, swap positions. We've seen that with Marlon playing there, swapping out wide with Mariona and Mariona coming in. It's such a big aspect of the way that Arsenal have been playing, and it's been hugely effective. I mean, we've even seen that with the fullbacks like Fox coming in. But yeah, in terms of Mariona, I do think what a fantastic player. I think we talked about this before. I was wondering how she would adjust to the league. I knew she would perform on the Champions League nights, but it's those league games that I wasn't sure about. But the fitness, and I don't want to jinx it, but the fitness and the energy that she brings, even though she's playing every minute of every game, and I see her as sort of one of the first names on the team sheet. I don't know about you, but I don't think you can really bring her out of that right now. It's not just the way that she performs, the impact she has. I think if you sort of looked at all the crosses and chances that she's created that we haven't even finished compared to the ones that we have, it's and she's a huge asset to this side. And yeah, I think we're talking about her right now as one of the key, not even just signings, but key players in that squad. And I hope, because I know she wasn't training with, I think she wasn't training with Spain
Today. I've just seen a couple of
Okay,
pictures,
good.
hoping that's all okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with her, because my one criticism's been that perhaps she's drifted out of games sort of in second halves towards the end, but watching some of the back, it's almost more Arsenal as a side have drifted out of games. They've
Yeah.
been a bit sloppy on the ball. They've not quite linked up in the final third. But yeah, positive sides, because with Arsenal, you are always going to get a big squad. You are going to have rotation to do. So to bring four players on the pitch from the bench, for them all to to have success with half an hour to go, I did think that was a really good sign. And as you say, a brave call from Renee Slegers to work out
Yeah.
it wasn't quite working against West Ham, and to make the change. Just wanted to read Rayan Skinner's comments. I stuck around to speak to her, actually, because I was quite interested to know what she thought, from an Arsenal perspective, about actually, are they going to make changes under an interim manager? And she said, I don't think they were going to change in the short turnaround, to be honest. We watched them on Wednesday night and have known those players for a long time, so I know what to expect from them in general as individuals. They very rarely stray from their shape. They've played that shape previously as well. So ultimately, the squad depth is strong. You know that whoever they put out is going to be a test. So obviously complimentary of Arsenal at the end, but to say, I know what to expect from them. They rarely stray from their shape. Obviously, Arsenal got the job done, but tactically a little bit worrying, when we talk about our struggles against low blocks, that a manager can come out and say, even though Jonas Eidevall's gone, we pretty much knew exactly what to expect from Arsenal.
Yeah, I think this is obviously something that we're going to have to look at. We've talked about predictability with Arsenal, kind of going into those low block games and doing the same thing every time and not sort of being adaptable and not changing that. I think that's the difference really when I'm looking at Arsenal compared to those teams that I see as above us right now. I think that the difference is how can we, really actually challenge these teams, and especially with a new manager coming in, I kind of expected we would see some sort of different sort of tactics from Renee. I know she's obviously, like we say, they don't want to repeat the same point, but she's been under Jonas Eidevall. But I'm interested to see, especially going into these games, if she is to stay as the manager. Like I said, how can she make these changes, and how can Arsenal be a side that people can't predict, can't read? And yeah, it's great to have those impact players, like you say, we've had those moments where we've tried to bring those players on and it just hasn't worked, and it doesn't always go the way that it went in that second half against West Ham. And my concern is, if we continue to be predictable, that teams are just going to break us down and they're going to know exactly what to do, and they are going to be able to stop us. And I think that, if we're being honest, that's maybe what happened in the Everton game that obviously led to that boring 0-0 that we had. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to consider, and I'm sure we'll be keeping a close eye on that, depending on who sort of does the next few games.
Yeah, I was sat next to Jamie Spanger, and I said to her at one point, it just feels like West Ham are going to hit Arsenal on the counter attack and go 1-0 up. And obviously
Yeah.
that didn't quite pan out, but it does feel like, every game at the moment is too slow on the ball in midfield, wasteful around the box when we get hit on the counter. And obviously West Ham are the players to do that. So, obviously the penalty opened the game up, and that was Stina running in behind, but we've got to finish off by talking about Rosa Kafaji. I mean, there were some Swedes who had a good day out in the WSL on Sunday, because what a performance from Joanna Rytting-Kaneryd, scoring that little jumpy volley and a couple of goals for her. But, Blackstenia is coming on and doing well. And Kafaji, first time finish, that sealed it. Really big celebration from her. We had Susie behind the camera taking the picture of it. But that was her announcing herself, surely, wasn't it, to the WSL? And now it's, she said to whoever's going to be in charge, I'm here. This is what I can do. Get me in the team, essentially. And, we can't expect her to start every game, but we've all said we'd like her to play a little bit more than she has been.
Yeah, I think if you were looking at an Arsenal side that was firing on all fronts, that was, getting the results and not really worried, maybe it'd be justifiable that she hadn't come into that side saying that nobody was replaceable. But when you've got a talent like Rosa Kafaji and she's sitting on the bench and you're looking at it like it's such an obvious choice because of her qualities, and her individual qualities. We saw that even I think before the goal. Like she, unfortunately, I mean, I love Gori as a player, but there was one moment where I think she just completely just threw Gori off really and sort of went past her. And I think it's those sort of individual things that we picked up on, being able to, especially later in a game when we need a goal or we need a win, to be able to come into the box, to be able to drive past players, and also to be in the right place at the right time for a finish of that quality. I think Arsenal will have to figure out how to put her in that side. I think I've been frustrated that she's been sitting on the bench and maybe she's sort of been, I think she is quite sort of taken that sort of opportunity and not being frustrated maybe by not getting that game time. She's come straight in, she's proven her point, and I do think if we want to win these games, we do need to start looking to players like her. And it's those opportunities, that lead to breakthrough seasons. We've seen that with Pelova, just that one chance to really get into the side, cement her place, and yeah, become like an upcoming talent. And that maybe if we look at it, she's the closest thing we've got to a player like Pelova who can sort of dictate the game, turn players, sort of, really I think just change the game. And I'd like to see her start because it's interesting, isn't it? What will happen if she does start? Will Arsenal sort of create more from the start, or do we kind of continue to use her as an impact sub? It's a tough decision, but I think it would be unfair to not give her the game time that she's earned and she deserves.
Yeah, it's that. You need a couple of brave selections, don't you? And
Yeah.
Arsenal played it safe a little bit too much, and you can see that in midfield and the little and Volti, as if Kyra can have sort of one bad half or one bad game, and straight away we're back to the old guard in midfield, and that's no criticism of them, but it's you look at the Arsenal team and far too often it's just again you go talk about predictability. And you see fans on Twitter all the time going, well, it'll be Little and Malty, it'll be Russo up front, but we're actually, we're not rewarding players enough for good performances. So yeah, interesting times ahead. Looking at the fixtures coming up, then United away, Brighton at home. That's on a Friday night, Friday the 8th of November at the Emirates, and then those two games against Juventus either side of Tottenham away. So a few grounds we're going to now where we've got unhappy memories, which is never really a good thing. We've got to sort them right. Obviously, Tottenham have been quite poor actually at the start of this season. We probably haven't expected them to be as bad as they have been, but they're struggling for results. Brighton look very good, and they'll be a test at the Emirates. And I've said all along, those two Juventus games, that is going to make or break our Champions League campaign. So for me, if you get a new manager in, you have to do it now, Daisy. That's my opinion. What would you be doing if you were in charge of Arsenal at the moment?
I really can see your perspective from this, and I'm really hoping I'm gonna stick with them. Let's just go opposites just for the fun. And I'm gonna say let's sort of see how Renee does in those games. I think it's a huge test for her against Manchester United, but I see something here, and I'm hoping it's the start of her building something. And this is not sort of the top level that she can go. Maybe she's getting through the games, she's getting to those big moments, and she's going to prove herself. So I'll be really interested to see. And the main reason for that is because I actually don't know who to choose
Mm.
as a replacement. I think obviously this is a big discussion in itself, but there are a lot of coaches available. But who is right for Arsenal is sort of a big question mark for me right now. I don't see the solution. I know Casey Stoney is a fantastic name and she shouldn't be out of a job, but whether she's the right fit for Arsenal, I'm not sure.
Well, the biggest change for me of Renee is how quickly she came over and spoke to us after the game. I was literally picking up my laptop and she was over by the mix zone straight away. I mean, Tim was luckily sort of stalling her for us, but with Jonas, you can be waiting until the floodlights are off and the ground is emptied sometimes, especially after a performance that's not great. So I certainly like that about Renee, and she was quite short in her answers, but I was keen to sort of ask about her emotions. She said we've been sad, obviously, as a team this week, but what we dealt with really well is the uncertainties that are ahead of us. We just tried to stay in the moment as a team, and I think the players have done really well. We had these two games ahead of us, and we wanted to win, and we did that. So I'm very happy, and I think she'll have probably poured a stiff drink on Sunday night and thought, "Thank goodness it's the international break." And look, she got her job done. Arsenal are back to winning ways. And look, whatever's left of the season, I don't think they're completely out of anything yet. And that's why whatever happens, I think when you do start a season poorly, you can then not write it off, but you can accept actually it's maybe going to be a rebuilding job rather than a challenging on all fronts job as we'd have probably liked it to be. But look, what's past is past, and what's obvious now is that these next few weeks getting this decision right, and that is where I agree with your point, is if Arsenal rush it and get it wrong, then this season could get even worse. They do need to get it right, but perhaps because of how sudden it happened with Jonas, that's where we can maybe afford the club a little bit of time to make this decision.
Yeah, it's so like the hardest part is like you say that fixture list that is looming in front of us, and maybe potentially it's going to be difficult. And I think when you've got a fan base who is so sort of supportive and loyal and wants the victory so much, every fan base does, but you know what it's like with Arsenal. I think if there is sort of a poor performance, if there is a poor result, it does get reflected straight away, and there is that pressure. And I like that Renee hasn't sort of commented too much on that. She sort of respected it and respected the fans, but not put that pressure on and not made it obvious that that is what is happening. I think for me, obviously it's the first game back, but it is a huge game. For me, that United game is huge because I think they have something to prove. Like you say, barring the Brighton result and even in the Brighton game, they've been extremely good in my opinion. So I'm really interested to see how we face up against United, and then obviously play. Oh, we've got so many tough fixtures. I can't even highlight one, but I do think it's how we play, and it's being able to go to these games and actually prove ourselves. And whatever happens, happens. Because if you win the games and you perform well, effectively the rest is out of your hands now, and we can't sort of, like you say, change what's happened. But I think all Arsenal fans will want to see is probably winning it all, but realistically, is just getting results and performing well, whoever that may be with, and also seeing those players individually, performing well. I think that's a huge aspect as well.
Yeah, you're right about the tough tests, actually. I mean, you look at the week Renee's had, she's had the weakest Champions League team, and I agree, from one of the worst WSL teams at the
Yeah.
moment. So she definitely is fortunate in that regards. And yeah, Manchester United coming up next after the international break. I think the main thing is that we pray for no injuries, because there are areas of that squad that still look a little frail, and hopefully you can get some players back. Certainly Laura Veenroy to getting some minutes, and yeah, Leah Williamson, Lotta Wibben-Moy, whatever's happening there. I mean, it's good to see they are back in training. We just need all of these players to come back in one piece, don't we, to take on Manchester United. Daisy, look, interesting times at the moment. You'll be joined by Claudia next week. Whatever will have happened by then, we don't know, but I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about in the international break. And you're off to Wembley Friday, are you?
I am, yes. I'm very much looking forward to that. A late decision to go, but I feel like these games are actually quite good games, quite good stadiums. I'm getting down to the US one, which I'm super excited for as well. I know that's in a little while, but yeah, it's a big test against Germany, and I just want to see kind of who plays sort of Arsenal player wise, and kind of how they get on, and I'll be following as much as I can, and obviously discussing with Claudia as well all the individual performances, as many as we can cover. I need to get the schedule up, but I know Arsenal have put out a piece, haven't they, about who's playing and when, so I need to clarify that too. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the international break. I think maybe we need it to take a breath, and sort of process what's happened, but then straight back on it with Manchester United. So that'll be fun. I'll be at that game too. So lots to look forward to, and yeah, hopefully Arsenal can perform for us.
Yeah, and one in Sheffield coming up soon, which I'll definitely be looking to go to, actually, against Switzerland, sort of just up the road from Derby. So
Yeah.
yeah, exciting times, always the case with an international break, and we'll see how they get on. Daisy, thanks for your time as ever.
Yeah, thank you so much.